Thank you for joining me on this video. My name is Kippy. I live on planet Earth with the rest of these Earthlings in a very interesting time. Interesting times indeed. I want to bring to you a very special letter that was written around 2,700 years ago by a man named Joel. Joel had written a letter that was for our time, and it certainly was for his countrymen in those days. But it was a letter that was supposed to be told all the way down through time. Fathers tell their children, and the children pass it on to their children, that something like this should be carried down all the way through the ages. Now, what's really important about this story that it has to be passed on. Briefly then, before I get into the book of Joel, which is pretty much a mystery to most people, I think. It's poetic language, it's prophetic, it's in a parable type language. Joel quotes a number of different authors, of writers that were inspired like he was. And I do pray that the Spirit accompanies my words the same time it did inspire the writing of this letter. Joel probably didn't really know what he wrote that day, but today we're going to look at it and we're going to see if we can see the meaning. Well, when I looked on the internet, to about 10 videos or so, and I watched them on fast forward, like double speed, and then I more or less, you can hit the 10-second button just to the right of the double arrows, and this could fast forward thoughts. If he's just reading, and I know that verse, so I just, okay, what's being said is what I was after. But it seems like they're all on the surface. They were not digging deep beneath sinking a shaft deep in the earth's crust, deep for veins of gold that are there. Like, more knowledge can be mined out if we only search for it with our whole heart. Okay, certainly Joel was writing about to his countrymen at the day, and not only that, but to all people all the time. And it's always been to impart knowledge and revelation, instruction for our good, especially this letter in the time of the end. Hear this, you old men. Now, who are the old men? Certainly it could have been the priests of his day, and was really to those that are old in the faith. They might not, they're going to lack, we're going to see that they've lacked the wisdom of the book, and now the wisdom is to come to them in the time of the end. If you've been around for a while, and this is for you, to give ear, all you inhabitants of the land. It's something that needs to be shared to all people. Has there ever been anything like this before, told in your days or ever after? Now, if you have a garden and some of the insects get in there and they eat some of the food, that's bad. But if the other more insects come in and eat, and again, and all the crop is eaten up, that's really bad. Because Joel described 3 different types of insects there, but all basically, specifically to bring us the point, I believe, that the garden has been eaten up. All the garden is eaten up. Now, whose garden is this? Is it Joel's garden? Is it his neighbor's garden? Was it a famine in the land?
It sounds biblical, but as the world grapples with the COVID pandemic, the continent of Africa is facing another plague, locusts. As Nick Schifrin reports, the small insects pose a serious threat to food security throughout the region.
I believe it was a poem, a prophecy for a garden, not a physical garden that you eat, but a spiritual garden, God's garden. God's harvest has been eaten up. In Isaiah 14, we can see that God does have a garden, and that's where the trouble began, with Satan. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 8. Oh, it turned right there. That was an accident. Okay. And the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage in a vineyard, as a lodge in a garden of cucumbers as a besieged city. So the daughter of Zion is left as a cottage in a garden patch, in a cucumber patch. See, what are you saying in Isaiah? This prophetic language, I love this language because it speaks to, the more we read it, the more it'll speak to us. I'll read verse 9 here. Except the Lord of hosts had left unto us a very small remnant, we would have been like Sodom and Gomorrah. Give ear, all ye people of Sodom and Gomorrah. Okay, so he said the daughter was left as a cottage in a vineyard. And so if you say you expected all the cucumbers to come in and they were going to be all taken to the market and it was going to be a cash crop. But how did it go that day, that summer? And you looked at your garden and there's nothing left. And you look and you go, wow, what's left? No fruit. But what's left? Just the shack. Well, at least you got the shack left. At least the shack is left. Maybe for next year there could be a planting, right? Because that shack was a good thing. It kept you out of the sun. It was a place to have lunch. And it's where you worked during the day and you expected all that crop, but there was no crop. Just that old cottage in the vineyard. And you can imagine it there. There it is. It's all by itself now and the door is blowing in the wind and there's a tumbleweed blowing by and that's it. That's the daughter of Zion left as a cottage. You see? And so here Joel is describing the language too when he says all the garden's been eaten up. And then while I'm in Isaiah, I'm just going to flip over to the 5th chapter. Now will I sing unto my beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard. My well-beloved hath a vineyard and a very fruitful hill. And he fenced it and gathered out the stones thereof and planted it with a choice vine and built a tower in the midst of it and also made a winepress there. And he looked that it should bring forth grapes, but it brought forth wild grapes. And you know the story. Look in John chapter 1. I guess I have to go there then. And that's a very sad thing. You look in John chapter 1. When he came to this world,
I've always spoken publicly to everyone. All my teaching was done in the synagogues and in the temple where all the people come together. I have never said anything in secret. Why then do you question me?
The light that was the true light which lightened every man that comes into the world. Everyone has a measure of his light. There's no excuses for anyone.
This was the real light. The light that comes into the world and shines on all people.
So he was in the world and he came to his own and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them they gave power. So he came to his own country. And what happened? And in the parable, I'll just keep it more to the point. I'll just reiterate some of these rather than turning there. But in the parable, there was the owner of the vineyard planted a vineyard and he went off into a distant land, right? And he left that with a husbandman, which was the Jewish nation, to share their light to the Gentile world, to all the world, This whole idea that there was going to be a harvest of the earth, The Lord of the harvest would come for the harvest. But they didn't do their work. As a matter of fact, when the Messiah came, they murdered the Messiah, their only hope. And so there it was. There was the garden of God eaten up, right? And so I think that's the analogy, and we can look at another analogy of how the garden's been eaten up, the grass and the trees and all that are burned up. But I think you got the point there. So let's just go back to Joel. Okay, you're going to see me jumping in and out of my own Joel study. It's been over a course of time that I'm actually working on this a little bit here and there, and then as I'm watching it now, I have to add some thoughts where I left off. Okay, well, I was talking about the garden being eaten up, and at the same time I remember flashing off, you can see there's the Son of Man hanging up on a tree before with the two other witnesses, or two others on the cross. the two other thieves, I meant to say. So, but I was kind of reading that maybe some might say, well, what do you mean the garden is eaten up? Didn't Christ die for the sins of the world? God so loved the world, he sends his only begotten Son. And here I'm saying, well, there the garden is eaten up. Didn't Christ come to redeem the garden? Christ came to redeem, like in John chapter 1, we went through that earlier, only those that had received him. He came to a physical nation, but the nation did not receive him, but there were some that did. And that was the harvest. Like when he saw, like in, let's say, Isaiah chapter 1, when we talked about the daughter would be likened to a cottage in a vineyard. And you say, well, okay, there's the vineyard, and you expect all these cucumbers in that harvest, and at the end you total up what are the assets of this year's harvest, and the only asset that remains is the little cottage, because there was no fruit, but there was still an asset, and that was a little cottage. And so the daughter of Zion was left as a cottage. That's how small the remnant was there. So we see that when now here comes the Son of Man comes incarnated to the earth, does his work that he does, and dies on the cross, and opens the way for all those who will. And all those who will was still a small harvest. There was a harvest, and that is the daughter of Zion, but the garden was still eaten up in respect to the numbers, the volume. The volume is eaten up of the fruit, but there is sweet fruit. There's some produce that remains. Because Amos saw it in the way that Amos saw a summer basket of fruit in Amos chapter 1. He heard from heaven, Amos, what do you see? And Amos saw, I see a summer basket of fruit. And Amos did not say, Lord, send down the baskets, send trucks. There's the harvest is great. No, he saw only a basket of summer fruit. Okay, so that's what I wanted to the point I wanted to bring out, that there is a harvest, but it's a few there be that find the way that leads to life. That's what the Savior said. So now I'm going to jump in. You're going to see me jumping in some thoughts that I had earlier before this one, was just to go on to the idea that it is a narrow way, and we want to know the narrowness of the way, because other than that, the saints stop striving to the point that they need to strive to enter in, it says, because the righteous are scarcely saved, barely, like brands plucked from the fire. He said, unless the Lord of hosts left until it's a very small remnant, we would have been like Sodom and Gomorrah. So there is a small remnant, and so we want to be in that remnant. And so, but I want to also encourage you now that, because if the harvest is so small, you might say, well, then how could I be saved? Well, there's something really interesting I want to share with you about how you can be saved. And it's one word in particular that's going to wrap this all up. And it really opens the door wider. I'll say it like that. In your heart, into the door of heaven. But there's something I want to share with you that's really going to bring salvation close. And whether I get to it in this first part of Joel, I don't know if I will, but I'm going to try to upload this video now, and then next time just go through it quicker and share my learn to share my thoughts faster. I mean not talk faster, but I mean to just start sharing and uploading rather than pondering what I'm saying and procrastinating on sharing the beauties of the scripture. with you, with my friends. All right, so now you're going to see me talking again more about this narrowness of the way and what it means for the garden to be eaten up. Okay, I think I need to interject some thoughts on this idea of the garden being eaten up, because I don't think you fully understand what this really means. The truth does hurt. It says men that love the darkness rather than light, and for that reason they're given strong delusion. We want to know what the truth is as hard as that may be, because it's going to help increase our faith, okay, in the long run, once we get over the shock. Okay, so we see pretty early on in the story that the world is destroyed by water, and it says one man was saved through grace. One man and his family. I think it's necessary to go all the way back to Genesis to show you there's always been a small harvest. Way back early in creation, we're going to see that one man was saved by grace. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Mighty One. So quickly on in the account, say we come down to Abraham now, the father of the faithful, and he was surprised to learn how narrow was the way. And he says, "Will thou destroy the righteous with the wicked? Is there any righteous with the wicked?" Abraham thought there was a lot of fruit in that garden. There's no cucumbers. And he says, "What about if there's 50, will you save it for 50? And then he goes all the way down. And if there's 30 souls, 20. And he says, "Well, if you don't mind me, peradventure, if I may humbly and ask, say, what about if there's 10? And he said, "I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. But he couldn't find 10. So in the story, we can see Lot is just dragged out. You know the story. Yeah. So because Lot, he lingered, and his wife doubted as a result of him lingering. He ends up in Zor. Yeah. So 5 cities destroyed on the plain. So yeah, coming down to Moses in the wilderness, you see the story of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram come to the congregation, gather them up, and all approach Moses and actually believe that Moses needs to be replaced by these more worthy leaders. They should have known by the miracles that were done by the hand of Moses. His face shone, he was lit up, he had to veil his face, that he was in fact the leader. But they said to Moses, they wanted a new leader because Moses was a little bit too strict on them. He was making the way narrow. And so they said, "You take too much upon us." I think this is number 16. Number 16. They said, all the congregation is holy. In other words, we're all saved. We're not under the law. You and your law, Moses, is what they were saying. So Moses went, "Whoa, don't say what you're saying, don't do that. But if you continue in the morning, we'll have a showdown and we'll see who's right." And so they came back in the morning. The Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, they were the priests. They were like priests. They were established congregation leaders, church leaders in the wilderness. They had the whole regalia on, like they had the censers, they had their suits on. They're all dressed up that morning. But before Moses can finish speaking, they are swallowed up. They knew Moses was right. These people were the people of the Lord, it says. The professed people, right? They come to him just a little bit later. And they say, "You kill the people of the Lord." I figured I should show you here. It's always good to take a look directly. They gather themselves together against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, "You take too much upon yourselves, seeing all the congregations are holy, every one of them. See, we are saved, Moses." But they were not. But on the morrow, all the congregation. So first off, they all run. They realize, okay, all the priests are swallowed up. Moses was right. They were scared. They left. But 24 hours later, they have the courage enough to come back and say that all the congregation of Israel murmured against Moses, saying, you killed the people of the Lord. In other words, according to the Bible, were the people, and Moses killed them. Now, how stupid is that? How stupid is that? So automatically what happens, the plague breaks out. Moses humbly falls his nose to the ground, face of the ground, to make an atonement. And so Aaron's running so fast, his boots fall off. 14,700 died because of I guess they were so, they all would have died if it wasn't for this atonement made by fire. So the point is that they thought they were saved and outside the keeping of Moses' law, but they didn't understand. And so where else do we see in the account? We come all the way down, and when it came down to, there was Yeshua, Prince Emmanuel himself on the earth. And they asked him if it was a narrow, and he said it was a narrow way. He said he longed to gather them under their wing, but they were not willing. He said that many shall desire to enter in, but would not be able. He said many would say, Lord, Lord, but he would say, I never knew you. So it's a remnant. It's a remnant that is actually saved in the end, a small number. I used to think that maybe they'd be saved during the millennium or after the millennium. No, there's a final day on earth. It's the last day. There'll be the last day to make a decision, and then the judge will stand up. Every case will be decided, and that's it. We're harvesting the souls from planet Earth. So. Yeah, I just want to say that it's a narrow way. They all left him that day, Prince Emmanuel, when he was talking a little bit too tough for them. And he said to the 12, will you leave also? And then Peter said, where will we go? You have the words of life.
This is the very reason I told you that no people can come to me unless the Father makes it possible for them to do so.
Because of this, many of Jesus' followers turned back and would not go with him anymore.
And you? Would you also like to leave?
Lord, to whom would we go? You have the words that give eternal life. And now we believe and know that you are the Holy One who has come from God.
I chose the 12 of you.
So there was 12, and then at the end of that ministry, was it 50 days later, at the outpouring of the Spirit there, when there was another, you gotta keep moving here, get your feet. There was another 3,000, and then I think 5,000 were added, or the number was 5,000. So after all of that work, when the Son of the Most High came right down to this earth and did what he did, it only that small number. So that would tell you, that would make sense that then by the garden being eaten up, that it equates to a few there be that find the way. Yeah, some other thoughts that I'm hearing in my head is some of you are saying, well, but yeah, isn't it all Israel be saved in the end? Yes, it says all Israel be saved. So the few that are gathered up in the last moments of time and through history, the faithful, all are gathered, and that's all Israel. All Israel, all the faithful, all the overcomers will be saved. But it doesn't say that the whole nation of Israel will be saved. All of Israel, like the physical nation of Israel, come on. So that statement must harmonize with the scripture, which must mean all Israel. Obviously the faithful, the good. There's good and evil, right? Not the evil people in Israel right now, but the good people who live in the nation of Israel, that make up the spiritual house of Israel. Okay, and then we might say, well, God begun a work, he has to complete his work. Yes, he will. He completes the work. But in the faithful, he said when he comes to the earth, he'll find little faith on the earth. And that's not all his people being saved with just a little bit of faith. It's a little bit of people being saved with a lot of faith. And then I might hear someone say, well, they would be saved through somehow God remarries. Like he divorced you, but in the end he remarries, and then they're all saved. Well, I want to say that the remarrying, Adam received the penalty, and he divorced the nation in a sense. When did he divorce that nation? Well, I guess he had to divorce the nation at the slaying of the Messiah, which was the last day where they rejected him, right? That would have been when the physical house of nation, Israel, the physical nation, the house of Israel, lost their time. And then it would be a just different way of preaching that message, and it would be a different message, an altered message. A lot of the foundation is the same. As a shepherd seeketh out his flock in the day that he is among his sheep that are scattered, so will I seek up my sheep, and I will deliver them out of the places where they have been scattered in the cloudy and dark day. I will bring them out from all the people and gather them from the countries, and I'll bring them to their own land and feed them upon the mountains of Israel. So this is where now here's the spiritual house of Israel being gathered and back to a physical house of Israel later. So Israel as a nation, it's always been a nation, but there's been a pure in heart within that nation. Okay, I think I need to inject another thought. That Israel will once again be a nation favored of God, not a nation forsaken. Now it's a nation forsaken of God. The physical house, the spiritual house of Israel is not forsaken. Okay? So, he says, now this is the prophecies of the shepherds. He talks about, he's got a controversy against the shepherds. Woe unto the shepherds of Israel that do feed themselves. The disease have they not strengthened, neither have they healed that which was sick, neither have they bound up. So this is the physical house of Israel. They didn't have that tender mercy that was in the golden law, let's just say. So in other words, now here's the time when he says that he seeks out his house of Israel. He'll seek out the sheep. And as a shepherd gathers the sheep, okay, in that day that he's among his sheep that are scattered, so I'll get my sheep and I will deliver them out of all the places where they have been scattered in the cloudy and dark day. So in the cloudy and dark day, this is the end of time. This is the last day of the earth. They're going to be, this would be just after the final day of atonement. Every case has been decided, so he comes for them. And he'll bring them from I will bring them out from the people. You see, these are people scattered, believers everywhere, and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them to their own land and feed them upon the mountains of Israel. And this is where the physical house of Israel will once again be, the first time ever will be inhabited by a true Israelite, where they all be in one heart, one mind. Does that make sense? And so, yeah, so the remarrying is the bringing back of the few. And so that's a big talk. I want to do the talk separately. I'm not trying to say there's not an Israel in the end. Yeah, there's a land inherited by the overcomers that are gathered home. And so, yeah, some thoughts that I had to interject I thought were important. But that doesn't mean that we can't be among the few. We can. And there's something really important about knowing the truth that makes the difference in that. And we'll talk about that again. In verse 5. Awake, you drunkards, and weep and howl, all you drinkers of wine, because of the new wine, for it is cut off from your mouth. Okay, awake. Awake, awake, ye that sleep, and five are wise. Five will hear the call and wake. They all wake up, but five become more biblically wise. I'm reminded of the days where Prince Emmanuel there was put on the stretch when all his humanity was tested in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he found his disciples sleeping, and he came to him a few times, actually wanting help from his friends, from humanity. He was reaching out one hand for divinity, but at the same time he stretched back and looked to his friends, but they were sleeping. And he said, Peter, you wouldn't pray 1 hour with me? You know, they heard him, but they didn't know. They're sleeping. We're asleep. Now we need to wake up. Especially now that we need to wake up. Ye drunkards. And weep. Now, what does it mean here, drunkards? Okay, so in other words, they're walking around daydreaming. You know, that's possible. I remember my brother we walking all across the neighborhood to call on a friend, but it was 2 a.m, but he was asleep. And that's kind of like what's happening right now. In a sense, we're all in this sleep, but in the last hour, the 10 virgins need to wake up. This appears, those that have a profession. Okay, so you see, they're drunk on the word. They have the wine of Babylon. They're drunk. In other words, it's not a pure wine. It's not a pure wine is teaching in this case and doctrine, and so it's not a pure doctrine that they have. So they're basically on the wine of Babylon, and the waters of Babylon. The wine of Babylon. So it's false teachings. Let's move along quickly then. I think you got the idea. Awake, you drunkards, and weep. And now there's calls to weep and howl, all you drinkers of wine. It's like in that last hour, the 5 foolish virgins, they went to the marketplace, but they couldn't find it, and they came back and they were at a closed store. And you know what was told them? You don't know the day and hour. It's told them. But the wise are already in, and the foolish, he slams the door and says, sorry, you guys don't know the day and hour. You know. I'm not saying we are to know the year of his coming. Okay, but for now, let's just take a look at they're weeping and howling, drinkers of wine. So they are to wake from the drunken stupor and become biblically wine now, because the new wine, it's the new wine is cut off from their mouth. You see, so they should have this new wine and have it and be able to take it in and pass it on, right? Be a channel for the new wine. And Prince Emmanuel, when he walked this earth, he gave a parable about wine, and using this old skin would not contain the new wine because it would burst it, because the skins have to be, you know the story. But so the idea of the new wine was the new teaching, and it's something that they didn't have and they needed it. So the elders in the faith right now need to wake up to this new understanding, and Joe's gonna share with us what this new wine is, if we're going to be open to it. So weep and howl, because of the new wine. I mean, weep and howl. Is this going to be just words on another talk that you hear about from this book? And how are we going to weep and how are we going to howl? What's going to touch you in your heart? What's going to wake you up that you will weep and howl for the new wine? Because you know what? It's the truth. It's the truth. If you don't love the truth, you receive strong delusion, and that you have a lie. So the truth is, what is it? In my opinion, it's a collection of knowledge, the facts of the past and the present and the future. What was, is, and what will be in the future. What has happened in the past, as much as big as that is, here, there, and everywhere. You may know it or you may not, but the thing is, it all happened in the past. That's what happened. And there's things that are going on right now, conspiracies. I mean, just a lot of things are going on, and we can learn endlessly. But what's more important is the wisdom of the future. What we need more than anything is the wisdom of the future. The facts of the future. Oh, I love the future. Yeah, this is what I like. This is what you have to be, how you have to be. We want to know what the future holds, because we're going to be faced with the valley of decision, which is the battle of Armageddon, and you're going to have to know, wow, when this happens, we go that way. And the more knowledge we have, the more facts we have, the more truth we have. Say the events connected with the close of time and how they unfold, the more we are strong in the faith to go through this only door in the end. So yeah, so we have to be, oh yeah, the verse I was going to say was Ezekiel 9 verse 4 says, we seal only those who sigh and that cry, and the rest set a mark for destruction. So if you're not sighing, then set a mark for destruction. Now it also says sighing and crying. But so that might be tough enough for us to be sighing and crying for a number of different reasons. But it says in Ezekiel 9 verse 4, seal those who sigh and cry for the abomination that be in the land, right? So we're going to see what's going to rise up is the abomination of desolation is going to rise up. Most people don't even, I think, in my opinion, really understand what that is. And Joel's gonna help us to see what is the abomination that's going to lay the land in desolation. Then, so that when we see that, it helps the heart to be able to weep.
I made you known to them, and I will continue to do so, in order that the love you have for me may be in them, and so that I also may be in them.
You know, it's the truth. So if you're drinking new wine, it's not cut off your mouth, you're sharing it, it's in your heart. Out of the heart, of the abundance of the heart, the mouth will speak. Okay. So we see, just to reiterate what we talked about then, was so far we're called to howl and weep for the new wine is cut off. And what's going on? There's no garden, no crops, no harvest. The field is white for harvest, but there's no laborers in the field. See, it's all eaten up.
Oh, Jerusalem! Jerusalem! You who killed the prophets and stoned those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. Look, Your house is left to you desolate.
A branch cannot bear fruit by itself. It can do so only if it remains in the vine. In the same way, you cannot bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine, and you are the branches. Those who remain in me and I in them will bear much fruit, for you can do nothing without me. Those who do not remain in me are thrown out like a branch and dry up. Such branches are gathered up and thrown into the fire, where they are burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, then you will ask for anything you wish, and you shall have it.
Okay, so what does it mean your house is left to you desolate? In respect to the Israel of today, like say for instance, okay, let's pray for Israel as a nation, and Israel is in the news lots lately, and Israel being God's chosen nation. So how does that fit today? Well, what happened in 1967? She became a nation somehow. And then there's talk about Trump bringing the capital back to Jerusalem. And so what I want to say then is, because this is a very sensitive subject for a lot of people, that I have to say the vast majority do have a wrong understanding on this. And so I'm trying to say it in such a way where you don't hang up on me, because it's just like, wow, you're talking a language that's so, where are you coming from? And it's like, no, this is the end times message. And I'm one of those voices that has gathered up a lot of truth. So when it's not mingled with the lies, it's sometimes not palatable. So, now we're a spiritual house of Israel to be gathered up in that cloudy and dark day. That cloudy and dark day has to be at the very, very end of time. The trouble is in the earth. You stood stiff for the truth. You resisted the mark of the beast, the image. You've overcome to the very end. And the world is being destroyed by the brightness of his coming. And you stood up. And now you're being transported back to a physical house of Israel. And I'm not going to say this is when Israel was born, that it's not 1967, but I want to say that certainly the spiritual house of Israel is born, because she just has come through the atonement, right? Went head to head with the powers of this earth, the false religions, in this final battle of Armageddon, which is not a battle of the nations, by the way. I used to think it was, but it's a battle of the religions. It's all the religions of the world against the truth. So the truth will be triumphant. Something like that word. And so they go on. So the redeemed, they're the scattered people who stand up for the truth, are likened to the Israel, and she's taken. Now she's a spiritual house, and that one day she stands up. Every case is decided, it's over, the judge stands up, now he comes to the earth. So that's when the spiritual house of Israel would be born in a day. And then she's taken back. He said to Peter and the bunch, if I go away, I'll prepare a place for you. In my Father's house are many mansions. And so in that land of Israel, not from the earth, because he went to build somewhere off the earth, right? Where's he building? He's got to build in Israel. And I can show you verses, another talk that the Israel is up there. And when Jacob wrestled, he inherited the name Israel, which was a place reserved for the overcomer. And so like this, I don't want to hear people say, oh, replacement theology, he's throwing away Israel and all that, and Israel's... Well, he said, and he saw the little video clip, I long to take you under my wing, but you are not willing. Your house has left you desolate. They murdered the Messiah. 3.5 years later, they actually murdered Stephen, who's had this last presentation to the nation, and ending the 490-year period, which is, okay, what am I talking about? That's another talk. But I'm just saying that there's more to think about about this, who is Israel today? And so this is the Joel study, but I'd like to really do a study on Israel sometime, if I can get to that. But so there you go, there's that thought. So for those that are sticking around and we're still here and we're old in the faith now, we're called to do something. We're called to weep and to continue to learn. Okay, let's go on with verse 6. Now what is this saying? For a nation has come upon my land, strong and without number, whose teeth are the teeth of a lion, and he has the teeth of a great lion. Yeah, there it is. Okay. And Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of those, saying, behold, the mighty one comes with 10,000 of his saints. There's that big number again. To execute judgment upon all, to convince all that are ungodly of them, of their deeds. So he comes with 10,000 saints. There's a warrior from heaven. And that's the army from heaven in Revelation 19. We see that same event. And throughout the whole book, actually. Okay. So what I'm proposing that this means then, in Joel chapter 2, verse 6, the nation that has come upon us is not from the world, okay? It's not a nation of the earth, this nation. Now, at first 10 years I read the Bible, when I saw nation, I always referred to nations of the earth, but then I learned there was a sea of nations also. This is the one that Lucifer was cast from. There's also a sea of nations on the earth. There's a sea of glass in heaven, and also a sea of nations, and sometimes they're called nations in that sense. Okay, so I want to turn to chapter 4 then. If you will return, O Israel, and I wrote my name Kip in there. If you will return, O Kip, return unto me, and if you will put away Kip's abominations. Can you put your own name in there? You actually really think it's referring to an ancient city, an ancient culture of people who have long since murdered the Messiah, who are just like one of the most corrupt nations on the earth? You think he's actually saying to the nation, okay, Israel, the mayor, and all the politicians, come on, you guys. Nope. No, they're never going to do it. It's to those backsliders, those that are almost there, to go all the way through. Okay, so it's a message to you if you're on the road. So that's why it's a message to, but he's calling Israel, he's saying, oh, come on, Israel's the overcomer. The very first one, Jacob, whose name was a usurper from a taker to an overcomer. That's why he got the Israelite name, and that's why you're also Israel if you will overcome. So he's saying, I'm married to you, O Israel. You know, I bought you with a price. And so we're encouraged to go on with that. I know we're studying Joel, but now we're looking at Jeremiah quite extensively, because Jeremiah helps to back up what Joel is saying here. I think they're saying similar things, and there's a lot in this chapter 4, so why don't we just skip right through it here. Declare it to Judah and publish in Jerusalem. So what we know, this is a worldwide event in the end. It's the mark of the beast for the entire world. So Jerusalem is synonymous for the city that should have filled the earth. Blow the trumpet in the land, cry, gather together, and say, assemble yourselves and let us go into the defense cities. That defense city has to be under the wing, like in Psalms 91. He shall hide us under his wings. So we're really at the foot of the cross here, to be in that defense city. Set up a standard towards Zion. In other words, the standard is, well, we're looking, what's coming from Zion? What's coming from Zion? This is the most important thing here. This is the standard. For I will bring it evil. Well, it's a parable way of speaking when evil's coming from heaven. But when you look at destruction and death and sorrow and war, that's evil. But it's so trouble from heaven, from the north. This is where Lucifer wanted to rise above the sides of the north and be like the Most High. Remember in Isaiah 14? So there's great destruction coming from the north. How great is that destruction? Well, let's take a quick let's just take a quick look over here. The Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turneth it upside down, and scatters abroad the inhabitants. The people, the priest, the servants, the master, the maid, the buyer, the seller, the lender, borrower, all of them. The land is utterly burned, utterly spoiled. The earth is mourneth, fadeth away, defiled. Boy. Yeah, we don't have to look any more at that. Yeah, okay, we got the point. Isaiah was saying the same thing. Destruction. So he's okay. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Okay, destruction. That's bad news, right? Where are we? It's harder reading through this camera here. But the lion is come up from his thicket, and the destroyer of the Gentiles is on his way. And I capitalized his because we know who he is. He has gone forth from his place to make the land desolate. What is his place? What is this place here? What place is he from? This has to be the second compartment of the sanctuary. He's in the most holy place. He has to finalize this work. The moment he finalizes his work, he will come to the earth, because why? Well, he's not going to keep his bride waiting. Finally, she's made herself ready. And we could take a look at that. We'll look at that later. I have to paraphrase this stuff or we're never going to get through it. To make the land desolate, and thy cities shall be laid waste without an inhabitant. We see this without an inhabitant over and over and over. And so we know that when he comes, all the sinners are destroyed on the earth. Every one of them, by the brightness of his coming. So here in verse 8, we're asked to gird ourselves with sackcloth. And I only done that once, but I guess I must have been led to do it, because I haven't done it since. For 4 days, and miracles follow that. Okay, we're called to lament and howl. Here's that howling again, like Joel talked about. Why? Because of the fierce anger. And here in verse 10, it says, he greatly deceived the people in Jerusalem. Surely you have deceived, greatly deceived. Like Paul said, giving them strong delusion that they should believe a lie. Okay. And there's that whirlwind and his horses. He comes on horses. Revelation 19 is a good one for that. And yeah, I would say cross Jerusalem out and put your own name in there. Wash thine heart from wickedness. Look at Dan. Remember Dan? Dan didn't make it. Now, I wanted to bring this up too. Make ye mention to the nations down on the earth, behold, against Jerusalem, watchers from a far country, not from the earth. Give out their voices against the cities of Judah, cities of the earth. These are the witnessing angels, the voices. And the keepers of the field are there against her round about. I see that's roundabout word used a few times when the earth is surrounded by the destroying warriors in this last moment. I seen it a few times. You can dig that, search that very roundabout. You'll see it. Okay, so in 19 you can see Jeremiah is not having a very good moment in this vision. How can we blame him? So, you know, this vision was so unbearable he could hardly hold himself. The sound of trumpets, the alarm of war. You know, that reminds me of the first day of the 7th month. It was a summons to the altar and 10 days of prayer before the high priest would come out of that temple. In the ancient temple, it makes sense to what happened in the heavenly temple. And there was no light. The mountains trembled. In 25, you see the birds of, what are the birds of heaven? These are the angels that used to work for your salvation. They're gone. I beheld, lo, in all the fruitful places was a wilderness, and all the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Mighty One and by his fierce anger. You know, don't be afraid of this. Don't be afraid of this anger. Don't be afraid of him because of what he has to do. Our Heavenly Father is infinite in his love, but the patience is not his patience. The time is up, and so this is what has to happen. I'll turn back. The whole city shall flee from the noise of the horsemen and the bowmen, and they shall. Boy, these warriors are really bad, man. They turn the earth upside down. Turn the earth upside down. No one's going to deliver them out of this from this army of heaven. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I'll have to show you in Jeremiah 4. Well, except this last verse. But I have heard a voice as of a woman in travail, and the anguish of her that bringeth forth her first child, the voice of the daughter of Zion that bewaileth her, that spreadeth her hands, saying, Woe is me! Now, for my soul is wearied because of the murderers. Okay, so we know these murderers are going to be hunting down the saints. Well, the saints will be hiding in the last moments of time. Then the destroyer will come from his place. But this is our prayer. We have one prayer and one hope. One defense is prayer. And our only hope is in his mercy in the last time. And so, yeah, this is what happens on the earth in this last moments of time. There's a voice going up. Let's see what Isaiah said over here, too. Isaiah 30 said, For you'll have a song as in a night when a holy solemnity. This is on the Yom Kippur, after 10 days of fasting and praying and fasting and praying. With much fasting, only these demons can be cast out of us. We're having a song in the night, and we're keeping this day, and we have gladness of heart. Why? Because we're going with music to come to the great and golden city of the Mighty One of Israel. Hallelujah! But they shall have a bridle in their jaws, causing them to err. But you will have a song in the night. And why? Because my sheep hear my voice. So that's why if what I'm saying is not making sense to you, I don't know, I hope it does, because this is what we're hearing his voice by the understanding of the reading of his word. So in verse 30, this class hears the voice, and over here in 28, this one has a bridle in their jaws, causing them to err. So they're in error. They don't hear the voice, but we're having this holy solemnity. We're only reporting there because we know we're a sinner, and so we want to acknowledge this great event of the final atonement and add our voice, mingle it in the sweet hour of prayer on this last day of Earth's probation history. Well, if you join me this far in this video, that's so amazing. I'm so grateful for that. And I just pray that I would have the opportunity to get this Joel part, the second into chapter 2, which is really kind of like my favorite chapter all along. But chapter 3 is has so much to say too. It confirms really a lot. The plan of redemption's in there, and some of the greatest secrets, I think, to confirm really where we're at. It's what to do at the time appointed. And so let's just leave it at that. It's kind of sobering material when you think, the garden being all eaten up, so who can be saved? But you think, well, no, if we're really honest with ourselves and we really want to be cleaned up, He'll create in us a clean heart, that our Savior is today the same as ever was, Like in that road to Galilee that day when he left his hometown, town of Judea. He was so beaten up and worn from the trip and experience that he left behind that he was weary, and he sat by that well, waiting for a traveler to come and quench his thirst. And when the disciples got back with the water and the food, they wondered, "Why are you looking so vibrant and healthy, like someone was feeding you?" And he said, "I have a food that you know not of." And he was lifted up from that Samaritan woman that was so willing to hear he was the Messiah, and go tell everybody about the Messiah, Yeah, so today he's just as willing to receive. The angels jump for joy. How much more than their Creator for one soul who repents? And so to hold his hand all the way, yeah. Okay, so thank you again. Check out some more videos. Hopefully I'll have some others on this you can check out. I thought about doing a bird video, but I don't have time for bird videos. I only contemplated it for a moment. So many bird sounds. God is love, and let's don't go it alone.